Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. The Communications Ministry has recently launched an updated version of the Malaysian Code of Ethics for journalists. This some 35 years after the first one was developed by the Malaysian Press Institute. Now, given how much the media landscape has changed in the decades since, is the code well suited for the way media is produced and consumed today? Joining me on the show is Wathshlah Naidu. She's the Executive Director of the Centre for Independent Journalism and member of the Pro Tem Committee of the Malaysian Media Council. Wathshlah, thank you for being on the show with me today. So, according to the Communications Minister, Fahmi Fadzil, he said this code was drafted after consulting with some key stakeholders, and that includes the Media Council sponsoring committee. I'm just wondering whether this version that we've seen launched this week, is that in line with what the Media Council was hoping to see?
Okay, so the Pro Tem Committee, we've worked parallelly, right? Because the Pro Tem Committee was also tasked to draft the initial bill. And together with the bill, we had also drafted a code of conduct, which is a more comprehensive look at the way we look at ethical and responsible reporting. Yeah, it was a more comprehensive document, and it's very different from the version that's been adopted by the Jabatan Penerangan Malaysia, right? So there are very key distinct differences. One of it is the fundamentals, I would say, with regards to how the Pro Tem Committee had envisioned its code of conduct, which is really grounded in the fundamentals of independent media, international human rights standards that would uphold the concept of independent media. And of course, I think we all agree, including the Japan version, is there has to be uniformity of standards and regulations. So there are slight differences, I think, in terms of how the Code of Ethics that was launched yesterday differs slightly in terms of what the Pro Tem Committee envisions as a broader code of conduct for media. And I think the clarity here, or the line here, is the fact that the Code of Ethics that was adopted yesterday is limited in terms of its functions with regards to the issuance of media passes. Whereas the scope, we hope, that the Media Council will be given would have the power to kind of self-regulate the media with regards to all these conducts.
Okay, all right. First of all, I want to ask you that given that the Pro Tem Committee of the Media Council was already working on a code of conduct or code of ethics concurrently with the legislation, the bill, why wasn't this left for the Media Council to handle? Why was there a code of ethics that was issued by government?
I wish I could ask this question too, because that is indeed the question. I think for decades now, we've been looking towards the establishment of a Media Council. And the reason why it's critical for this code of, or any kind of regulations, right, to be adopted by a Media Council is because of the independent nature of any such code, right? And the fact that it would have multi-stakeholders involved in the drafting and adoption process. So here, unfortunately, I would say, I agree, as I said, the need for uniformity, but this code of ethics has been initiated by the government, and the powers remain with the government in terms of the implementation. So it kind of concentrates powers in the hands of government. And we are concerned at times, of course, due to the lack of transparency in terms of the processes, related procedures, that there could be forms of how the code can be used to censor the media and control the media.
Okay, could you elaborate on that, particularly because of this code playing a crucial role in the managing of the media certification card, right? What concerns do you have with the fact that this code could be used as potential grounds for issuing a media card or revoking a media card?
Yeah, I think we recognize that the powers to issue media cards is indeed with Japan, right? Jabatan Penerangan Negara. But it needs, as I said, there has to be clarity in terms of not just the code, but also the procedures of how these code is being interpreted and applied. All right. So, for example, some of the pending questions we have is: what is there a right to appeal in the event media cards or media passes are rejected? Yeah, or revoked or suspended for any reason. Who then sits in these appeals mechanisms, if there is indeed one? Because if there's no clarity, there's no role of other stakeholders in the process, as I said, it will become the government being the sole arbiter of who deserves a media card and doesn't deserve a media card. I think that is the sticky point here, which is slightly different from what a media council would have envisioned it to be. Even though there would be separation of powers, I would say media pass is critical, other aspects of code of conduct would be under a newly established media council, I hope, in the near future.
Wathshlah, are media cards necessary? Are press passes or state-issued press accreditation, is that a practice that we want to see continued? Help me think through the pros and cons here.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, Melisa. I would say it should not, it shouldn't be a requirement, because if we are looking at a vibrant media environment, then there shouldn't be any form of restriction to say who should and shouldn't be a media. There could be other forms of requirement, for example, in terms of ethical reporting and so on.
And hence the reason, if you recall some of the draft of the Media Council bill that was made public by the Pro Tem Committee, it has an opt-in process. So whoever wants to be part of the Media Council, you have then the protection of the Media Council, right? And it allows the accreditation is to lend credibility. It's not to restrict access, for example, and things like that, right? So, I mean, I think more and more countries are moving away from media passes, yeah, and defining or limiting the scope of who can and shouldn't, have access to critical public spaces, especially, government press conferences, parliamentary sitting, court proceedings, and things like that. There could be, as I said, certain regulations that could be met, but media passes means, again, control of media by the government.
Right. Well, since we still have this government practice of state-issued press passes, I also noted that the ministry said it was thinking about or exploring the need to expand the Code of Ethics to apply to quasi-journalists, was I think the term that the minister used, people like podcasters and bloggers and influencers who are also covering news stories on their individual platforms. When we think about these non-traditional media actors, Wathshlah, and how do we think about Code of Ethics of journalism applying to non-traditional journalist actors?
If we are looking at it in the context of practices, I think, of course, certain ethical and responsible standards, should be applied across board. All right. But as I said, it should be something that's an opt-in process. That means I want to uphold these standards, but not used as a means of cracking the whip. All right. And I think the government actually has a larger responsibility. It's not only about limiting or restricting access, right? It is about what is the government doing to create an enabling environment so that there is media freedom, there is plurality, diversity of opinions. I think that is really critical. More and more, I think countries are moving towards creating this environment and removing all the restrictions, especially vis-a-vis legislations or regulations and so on. So we need to think a little bit more progressively, and I'm really hoping that as we move forward with this government, we would think about different opportunities to create a more vibrant media and a vibrant thinking society.
Wathshlah, thank you for being on the show with me today. Wathshlah Naidu from the Centre of Independent Journalism. We're going to take a quick break here on Consider This. We'll be back with more. Stay tuned. Hi, thanks so much for staying with Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. Let's continue our discussion about the recently launched government-initiated Malaysian Code of Ethics for journalists. Joining me on the show now is Kamarul Bahrin Haron, who is more affectionately known in the industry as Cik Kem. He is an adjunct professor at University Malaya and a senior associate at MITE, which is a think tank that's focused on government-industry partnerships in high tech. So Cik Kem, thank you for being on the show with me today. It's good to see you back on TV, and I want to ask you, given your long experience with the media landscape, how do you view the significance of the newly launched Code of Ethics for journalists?
Do I have the whole show?
No, you don't.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to the Consider This team, AWANI, and also, of course, Mel. We go back a long way. I've been in trenches with you. But before I answer that, Mel, I've been reading like what any journalist would do, what others has been saying since yesterday until today. And I think more than 70% from my count would like to approach it from a press freedom perspective. But for somebody who is nearly this year 30 years in journalism, media, and communication, and for the last 3 years, I've been outside the newsroom. I've been more like a geek talent for media and communication for non-media, like going to the industry that's not media, going to the public institutions, government and agencies. And I'm going to collate everything there and distill it for you in the answer that if there is attention to the plight of journalists and media, that's good. So at the very least, the new Code of Ethics after 35 years, I was not even a journalist, let alone you. I don't know where you were, Mel, in 1989, but I was not even in journalism school yet. And now I'm nearly 30 years in the industry. So good if there's a review, good if it's to make journalists closer to the current era of technology, which is heavily influencing media, not just dissemination of content, but also content generation. So my answer to you is good, especially if we look at it, people are reacting as if it's a blanket ruling for how journalists operate. To me, it's not, because it's clear through the government what they say is that it's linked to the accreditation. It's Kad Perakuan Media, the KPM thing. You know, that thing that media has. If Mel is working with Astro, she has an Astro card, but she also have another document from Jabatan Penerangan to acknowledge that she's a journalist, which means, especially for government official function, she can be there by right. So I don't think that that's the majority of journalists and also media workers nowadays. If we expand the meaning and definition of media to include even gig workers like me, who does not have a newsroom, does not have a company, does not have an institution brand, but we are producing content, we are giving our views and thoughts. So we don't have accreditation, but that does not mean that we are not ethical or we are not abiding by any code of ethics. Mel, if I can jog your memory, but I'm sure it's still fresh in your memory, when you entered Astro AWANI, you have to sign a document called editorial guideline. Even AWANI has an internal document for both digital and non-digital content generation and dissemination. So I guess it's good. But having said all that, as a practitioner, as a person who had to lead a newsroom of plenty of journalists before, the plight is the most important. If we're talking about journalism now and local media journalism, it's like talking about the Titanic. The ship has hit the iceberg. And we saw that in 2019, more than 1,000 media personnel lost their job. I have not had a salary at the end of the month's job since January 2021. So the disruption of technology, digital platforms like Meta and all the rest, has really put a Malaysian local journalism and media ecosystem on the defensive and on the run. We are grappling to keep up with the global disruption. That should be the bigger context of how we look at anything concerning journalists and media. So for me, it's good, but I hope the same spirit that sees after 35 years, this is being really looked at. Macam mana Mel kita nak memadanikan media dan wartawan? Madani means inclusive, masyarakat bertamadun, civil society. So inclusiveness of the media macam mana? So inclusiveness of the media means we are not beggars, but we want the powers that be to help make the ecosystem more just and more fair. Isn't that the promise of any Madani policies? So if in Capitol Hill, we can see how the senators, almost albeit directly racist, asking the CEO of TikTok about whether he's a Communist Party member. But if I take the sensation out of it, the whole initiative is to grill the social media platform. What are they doing for child safety? It's a really, really huge issue. And correct me if I'm wrong, Australian government, and I was young enough as a journalist when Malaysian media were going against Australia media. They were accusing us of living still in the trees and we were taking them to task for Aborigines. Our former big boss did that story. I remember that we shall reserve for our coffee talk off camera. But on camera, I will say this. Let's look at the journey and destination for all Malaysian journalists and content creators in general. Because everything now has been disrupted. It's not just the platform. The digital platform also carries tools, digital tools that enable for content creation to be done. They do not have to carry now a single camera anywhere, a single editing person sitting editing anywhere, because if you attach the current social media platform and any other digital platform to the engine of generative AI, for example, so I can make Melisa the famous anchor of Astro AWANI without even recording you, but it's you that people see.
Oh, I hope you don't do that. Okay, just I want to take to that point of that there's this rise of social media as a growing source of news consumption and the increasing influence of non-traditional media actors who also cover news stories, right? Podcasters, bloggers, influencers like yourself, Chitkam. The issue is, I think from the government's point of view, is that they're saying, well, we have this code of ethics for journalists now. For those who also do the news, who are not quote-unquote journalists, or to use their words, quasi-journalists, there is a challenge in enforcing these media standards. Not everyone has a newsroom background like yourself. So how do you think about that? How do you think about upholding ethics of journalism within a more diverse media landscape?
I'll give the analogy of our famous or infamous traffic and drivers. You know, if a driver doesn't stop at a traffic light, if they didn't signal when they turn left or right, if they, you know, stay so close to you at 110 kilometers per hour on the plus highway. So you can only talk about ethics after you have looked at the ecosystem. AWANI discussed, Mel, way early about there's no such thing as accident. Sweden has a zero accident policy, and they look at not just attitude of drivers, but they look at the engineering side, the science side of mobility itself. So I guess it's the same for the question you're asking me. Before we even look at what the content producer or the journalist does, how does the ecosystem enable them? If there's no traffic light to warn them of impending doom or danger or wrong that they are doing, if the social media platform is not put to task to work together to ensure that no child in Malaysia is harmed the moment they go on the platform, then why are we only looking at the drivers? Because the road can kill. The road can make you go off into a ravine. So I'm not saying that the drivers are not important. I'm saying in the big picture, from a thought leadership standpoint, we must engage at a deeper, more holistic nature of what is now called the media.
Right. Chitkam, can I ask you what you think the role of the government should be within the media industry? Because we've talked about a self-regulating media council. We're hoping to see that in the future. What would you like to see the communications ministry prioritize in terms of shaping direction and development of the media industry?
You know, this is why I went literally on bended knees just to get you over from the other media institution to join AWANI, because you are so sharp and clever. So I'm going to answer you this way, Yamel. it's tough for me to say this because people tend to construe things very to the extreme in Malaysia. But look, why is it after decades of independence, the way we approach media and communication is still like the colonial powers in spirit? In spirit, that means we tend to look at control first. We tend to look at, can we control media? Can we control journalists? Look, for somebody like me, raised by great parents that ensure at least I have ethics, if not good enough to become a doctor, why would I want to look at wrong things to do first? Assuming that I'm okay, how does the country empower me to be the best of journalists, to make the media the best in the world? So my point to you from that question of yours is, why are we as a government and as a nation, for example, look at media from controlling it perspective rather than why is it not an enabling positive factor? If you define media broadly, look at the top 5 biggest companies on Wall Street, they are all technically a media play because they own big digital media platforms and they earn from it. And they even, like Google, Facebook, X, they even have spin-off that reads into other things. So why is it not in the 5-year Malaysia plan? Why is it not in Wawasan Kemakmuran Bersama? If we had a Wawasan 2020 like before, kenapa tidak ada tiang media? If media is so all-encompassing, including now AI, big data, and all this, we are still treating media only from the consumption and consumer perspective. Why are we not looking at it as an engine of growth? It is an engine of growth. It is about data, it is about information, and it is now digital. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mel, but even your show is accessed more digitally than analog on screen. So what are we talking about here, Mel? What we're talking about here, you should be in the future minister running digital for the country, sort of thing.
I don't know if that's in the cards for me, but I want to thank you for being on the show with me, Cik Kan. I appreciate you sharing your insights with us. That was media industry veteran Kamarul Bahrin Haron, wrapping up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.